I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Santa Barbara Airport Commission for February 19th, excuse me, February 19th. We will start with a roll call, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. Karen Kahn.
Present.
Carl R. Curry. Craig R. Curry. Carl Hopkins.
Here.
Jim Wilson.
Here.
Paul Bowen.
Here.
Dennis Houghton.
Here.
Carol Goodman. Here. And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Notices that on Thursday, January 9th at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at the Airport Administration. First up is public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled before them that same day. The total amount of time for public comments will be 15 minutes. No individual speaker can speak for more than 3 minutes. We have some speaker requests here, so I will get out the infamous timer so that we can keep things. Whoops. Stopwatch. Here we go. Now, I see a very large crowd here, and I see several items on the agenda that I'm sure are going to take some time. So I will say that we need to keep this to a strict 3 minutes. Vince has, oh wait, that's item number 9, number 10. Ken Ackler, I presume you're probably for number 10?
Yes.
Okay, so we have no open public comments. Liaison reports. We'll start with our Santa Barbara City Councilman, Eric Friedman. Welcome.
First time here. Good evening, Chair Hopkins and board and staff. My name is Eric Friedman. I was appointed as the new liaison from the City Council, Santa Barbara City Council, to the Airport Commission. I represent the 5th District of City of Santa Barbara, which includes the airport. And I'm glad to be the liaison and looking forward to the issues in the coming year at the airport, which I coming up to speed on and learning that there's quite a few issues going on and tonight's meeting, and look forward if you have any questions or any time for me. I'm your contact at the City Council as well. That's all I have.
Thank you. And do we have James from the, yep, our Goleta Council liaison.
James Cariaco, City of Goleta. I don't really have a report. I'm just continuing with my second year as the liaison to this commission, and I look forward to continuing to observe your work both from near and afar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commission matters. The first item, number 4, is the election of officers and subcommittee assignments. And the recommendation is that the airport select the 2020 chair, vice chair, and make subcommittee assignments to proposed subcommittee structure. Yes.
I would like to nominate a slate of chair as Carl Hopkins and vice chair as Paul Bowen.
With pleasure, I would second those nominations.
Are there any other nominations? The nomination's closed. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. I will do my best to do my best job. And I know Mr. Bowen will be a very good fill-in on the event that I am not able to attend. The next item is subcommittees. And go ahead, Ms. Khan.
Yes, I would, just for the edification of some of our members who have not been here a long time, point out that the committees that we have that currently exist are there because they covered the main issues that we have here at the airport, which is to say airline, general aviation, and the others were there for the time at which we actually had a need to meet and discuss. Lease review was something that was ongoing since that's a big proportion of the airport's business, whereas budget occurs once, maybe twice a year, And ground transportation rarely meets anymore since we seem to have settled a lot of that problem. But I've always felt that having a very clearly defined subcommittee that deals with the problem area is the best idea. I think all of the proposed 4 areas are great items for consideration in each of those general subcommittee meetings. But to have that as your subcommittee structure, I actually tried to remap and figure out where would our existing, what have we got, 2, 4, 6 committees go to this 4-committee system, and I found I would have to go to 2 or 3 committee meetings to get the full story on an issue. So I would like to recommend, and I move that we keep the subcommittees the same as they are presently structured.
I would second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there some discussion?
I think before we consider the motion, I would like to understand a little better how staff would see the current subcommittee structure folding into these 4 areas.
Chair Hopkins, this was a proposal presented to the commission as an alternative to the existing structure because the existing subcommittees are made up of ad hoc committees for which there is not currently activity that occurs on a regular basis. The 4 organized committees that were recommended fit within the structure of the airport and allow for any subject matter covered within the airport to be addressed within those 4 general committees. It is, however, the Commission's prerogative to continue with the status quo, and staff would be happy to do that.
I had a comment on this also. My reason for staying with the traditional subcommittees we've had in the past, they were fairly effective where people who were the most experienced in that area would be on those committees. And that when something got up to the General Airport Commission, knowing that not only that there'd been an informational subcommittee meeting, but the subcommittee had a motion to approve the item, like in, say, lease review, that the other commissioners at the main one could think, all right, the subcommittee all approved it. This has been worked over pretty good, and we know to let it pass. So I kind of like the functional structure, and I like the structure where we actually have a resolution at the end of the subcommittee. If it's just a discussional subcommittee meeting, we aren't getting any work done. But my preference is the traditional structure of the subcommittees.
I'll weigh in here. I'm interested in improving efficiency in the commission as much as we can, and I kind of like this format, so I would like to make a motion to accept this.
We have a
We
motion.
have a motion here to, I believe, continue with the existing. And a second? Are there more comments, discussion?
I would add that each of the new committee titles are easily good topics to be subdivided and discussed at, for example, if you have a general aviation issue, then yes, you need to discuss the administrative aspect, you need to discuss the budget aspect of the proposal, you need to discuss the operations. So all of those things are good points to be covered on the topic, but to have to race to 4 of those meetings because this is an administrative issues and then go to this because this is the budget part of it strikes me as not the, should we say, economizing of time that we can do now by discussing all of that in one meeting that deals with what is the subject, because we don't tend to have things that are spread out. We have an issue that's a general aviation issue. We have an issue that's an airline issue. So they're pretty well aligned with what the committee structure has been.
Okay, either of the other commissioners wish to comment before a vote? So those in, the motion is to retain the existing, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed?
Did we have 2 opposed?
No.
1 opposed? Then it passes. We will keep the same. And I guess then the next item would be, given that, and unfortunately, we do not have in our agenda, and I forgot to bring with me the list of current committees and who is on them. But I guess, thank you very much. I would suggest that we start by saying, is there anybody who wants off of a committee that they're on or on a committee that they're not on, or should we leave it the same? I'll run through it. Air Services Chair Khan, Dennis Houghton, Jim Wilson with an alternate of Paul Bowen. Budget is Jim Wilson as Chair, Craig R. Curry and Paul Bowen with an alternate of myself. General Aviation is Chair, Craig R. Curry, myself, and Karen Khan with an alternate of Paul Bowen. Ground Transportation is myself as Chair, Dennis Houghton, Carol Goodman, and Karen Khan as alternate. Lease Review is myself as Chair, Paul Bowen, and Craig R. Curry with an alternate as Karen. And Noise Abatement is Karen Khan, Paul Bowen, and Carol Goodman with an alternate of Dennis Houghton. By the way, that reminds me, would everybody please turn off their electronic devices of varying kinds? So is there anybody who wishes to change? Otherwise, I suggest we just leave it there anytime during the year. If people develop an interest or lack thereof and their particular subcommittee certainly can be changed.
I would be pleased to remain with my current assignments.
Myself, the same.
Same.
Same. Fine. Thank you very much. So we will now go back to our agenda. That was item 4. Item 5 is the director's report. Director Thompson. Oh. Yes?
I'm sorry, Chair, that was by unanimous consent?
That was unanimous consent, yes. And before we start the director's report, I have a question. Are these our new cameras up here?
Yes, they are.
Chair, I didn't get who made the motion and who was second.
The motion was made by Commissioner Khan and seconded by Commissioner Bowen.
Thank you.
Item 5, the director's report. Please, sir.
Good evening, Commissioners. Calendar year 2019 ended with the airport realizing a 27.1% growth in passenger enplanements over the previous year. This positioned Santa Barbara Airport as the fastest growing airport in Southern California for the second year in a row. 2020 is already off to a good start, with January alone reflecting a 38% growth over the same period last year. With the addition of new service and added frequency, we're off to a great start and an even better record year for this year. The High Sierra restaurant property has reverted back to the airport. Staff will now continue to pursue short-term opportunities for the building. Litigation is ongoing, however, with the first hearing scheduled for March. Staff continues to work on the development of next year's budget. While we are optimistic about revenue projections, there still remains a gap between our projections and our needs. We have already held required meetings with the airlines, and we've received feedback from them. A budget subcommittee will be scheduled in the coming weeks as we finalize our projections. And we do anticipate presenting the budget to the full commission in April. And do we have any other comments from the team? Nope. That concludes the director's report.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you, Maureen. Mo? We have a consent calendar here. We have 3 items on the consent calendar. The first is that the commission waive and reading and approve the minutes of the commission meeting of Wednesday, December 18th. The second is that the Airport Commission receive the monthly airport property management report. And the third is that the commission accept the proposed 2020 schedule of meetings, including the reschedule of the regular commission meeting on the following date, September 16th, moved to September 23. And I believe that is for staff off-site development conference or something of that nature.
That is correct.
So do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That was unanimous. Okay. Next item is number 9, the Santa Barbara Airport Minimum Standards Update, the consultant engagement, stakeholder notifications. And the recommendation is that we receive the staff presentation. There will be no vote at the end of this presentation.
That's correct. And before we begin our presentation, agenda item number 9 is a continuation of the process to update the minimum standards provisions related to independent commercial activity on the airport. This is a significant issue that must be addressed because of the lack of control under the current conditions that leave the airport and the city vulnerable from a number of fronts. Addressing minimum standards updates is always a challenging effort. However, the airport is a highly regulated environment, and for good reasons it's highly regulated. And the lack of appropriate controls and oversight exposes the airport. In November, staff presented you with a proposed direction for addressing this issue, and we maintain we are headed in an appropriate, fair, a reasonable, and a compliant direction for this issue. The Federal Aviation Administration also agrees on the approach and that it is consistent with compliance with our grant assurances. Since November, we have listened to the stakeholders and we've responded. In doing so, we took a step back to evaluate the process, and we inserted more time, more meetings, and more expertise into the process. We're confident that adding these components will get us to the appropriate solution. Tonight's presentation will walk you through the latest steps in the process, for which the main objective is to help you understand the process in real time so that you are armed with the necessary information to make the difficult decisions that you must make on this issue. And with that, Aaron will provide the presentation.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. Happy to report that we've been making strides and efforts towards the adoption of the updated minimum standards, but first there are some very critical steps that we must take as we assess where we are today and where we need to be in the future. So with that, I'll give you a quick update, as we have been doing monthly, on the current status that we sit in today. So as of tonight, the focus of this presentation is to speak a little bit about the consultant's background and the process that's going to be followed in order to walk through ultimate City Council hopeful approval of this document, the stakeholder notifications and the outreach that's taken place, as well as the most recent public engagement sessions that have taken place over the last 2 weeks, most specifically the last 2 ending yesterday. So we were tasked with finding an expert in the field, and we were turned to Aviation Management Consulting Group because we were advised of their expertise in minimum standards updates throughout the country and some airports specifically within our region. They've been providing these services for over 20 years, and I will report that the consultant selected has been in the industry over 50 years. He's been airport director at various facilities across the West, most notably Santa Monica Airport, where he was the airport director for an extensive period of that 50 years. But most specifically, AMCG, they have a various listing of airport specialties that they provide: airport planning, business development, ops, management, leadership, and just general consulting. And I think it's important to note that each of the firm's consultants are also, they're at least privately rated FAA pilots. So they understand not only the needs of the users, but they have a grasp of the understanding of the need of airport management and the users both. So some recent airports that they've participated in the specific airport minimum standards updates. Ongoing at San Luis Obispo, Missoula Airport, Lubbock, and Coastal Carolina Regional Airport. And there were a list of others. I just asked for a short list when we were starting to engage with the consultant to understand and truly understand what type of work they were performing in the field. It is a firm that truly specializes in the management and compliance documents, i.e. the rules and regulations, but in our specific case, it's the airport minimum standards, which regulate commercial activity on the facility. They also have a firm understanding of through-the-fence assessments when it comes to property owners perhaps next to the facility who might want access into the airport via a taxi lane or taxiway, because that's a very delicate balance that we have to maintain when you're looking at the regulated users on airport, regulated underneath the airport minimum standards, as compared to an adjacent property owner. Our selected consultant is based in Simi Valley, so he's got a long history and understanding of Santa Barbara. He's acquaintances with the former airport directors. He's very familiar with what's been going on just due to his proximity there in Santa Monica. We did engage with him in January, ultimately have executed the contract for his services, and then his first task after the initial review of the existing minimum standards was to come up and understand exactly what it is that the stakeholders and users here in Santa Barbara, what their thoughts are about this process. So it is in close proximity to us, which is good for the service. So moving through to the process, I'm skipping ahead here, so I'll cover this slide real quick. So again, his experience with the FAA Airport Compliance Office and dealing with very complex issues such as where it was and still occur in Santa Monica today. Similar projects that he's had currently working with the San Luis Obispo Airport on their minimum standards document. And then of key importance is the familiarity with Santa Barbara and the Los Angeles Region Airport District Office. If you're in the business, you start to develop these relationships over time, which is critical to the success moving forward. And the other very important piece about AMCG's approach, which I think is very critical to our update, is the programmatic and inclusionary approach to updates. It's getting stakeholder feedback. It is a very important process we must follow when we have the initial drafts. We then take the feedback provided by the public and then the feedback provided by our city attorney's office and airport staff to make sure that we have a document that works for the culture of our facility. So how are we going to work through this? Well, specifically, our consultant will collect, review, and analyze our existing documentation, which has already taken place. We move into the stakeholder meetings as I described, and then we'll review the input and draft updated minimum standards as needed. And then we'll provide that draft for review. Ultimately, we'll come to the GA subcommittee to provide our recommendation for moving forward based upon those edits. And then we'll assess the draft document and update it as needed based upon feedback with any alternatives to the proposal that currently exists. Finally, we'll come back to the Airport Commission with a recommendation for approval, and then finalize the minimum standards update one last time with any additional feedback that we receive, and ultimately proceed to Santa Barbara City Council for adoption. So notifications was an item that was brought up in one of our last commission meetings, and specifically we were looking at the best way to have the appropriate outreach. So we have multiple email distribution lists, many of which have individuals who are interested and many of which who have individuals who are not interested. So with that we have to really kind of hone in on what is the most appropriate outreach for us as the airport. So that's one of the first challenges that we work through. So the way that we handle notifications as it stands today for construction activities, special events, is we reach out to them through our direct business contacts, because those are the individuals that we have relationships with and we have their contact information. And then typically, as when that construction would occur or a special event, we would also have outreach to the FBOs. The FBOs would then make notifications to their users because we don't have their entire user list. So that's the best way that we can approach the stakeholder outreach. And with that, the business relationships that we have very specific points of contacts that have leases at T-hangars, the tie-downs, FBOs clearly, the flight clubs, and then the flight schools, as well as anybody else who has communicated an interest. We have a list from 2017 that had all of the interested stakeholders that was part of that process that we were able to build upon. And if anyone has an interest or they're not on the list currently and they wish to be, feel free to just leave your email address with our executive assistant, Mo Graham, and she'd be happy to add you to that contact list. And as I already spoke to bullet point 1, that's just the outreach that the FBOs would provide. Additionally, we will post all meeting notices on the bulletin board, just as we do for our Brown Act notifications, and for the stakeholder engagements, we did just that. Additionally, if you're interested in commission matters, you have the ability to sign up through the City of Santa Barbara's website, and you can sign up specifically for agenda-related items that will be coming to this body right here and or the subcommittee itself. So for the stakeholder engagement that just wrapped up over the last 2 weeks, the objective was to solicit input and alternatives, both in the meeting, do the question and answer, as well as kind of just give an overview of where we're going with the current proposal. That's not the only opportunity that the public has to engage in this process. That's just one where we have a face-to-face opportunity with an expert in the field. Overall, throughout the course of the 3 meetings, we had approximately 60 to 75 users who I would estimate attended. A few of those were participating in each and every meeting to make sure they captured everything that they needed to. So, again, the meeting times on the 12th and the 18th as shown. Overall feedback, as I was in each meeting and then in speaking with the consultant after the fact, we found that the meetings were productive with varying levels of user feedback. Some expressing satisfaction, some expressing dissatisfaction with the overall direction. I will say there were valid questions that were presented about some very special services not provided on airport for very special types of aircraft. So that's something that we're going to have to look at a little bit closer as we go through this process to make sure that the users on the airport do receive the services that they need. Especially if you start to consider, you know, if you had a specific aircraft that were perhaps historic in nature and you only had one mechanic or one flight instructor that's type rated and or certified to operate on that aircraft. Those are the things that we'll have to assess as we dig deeper into this process and finalize the draft that will be presented for public comment, for additional public comment. I will say, though, that there was not an open and shut viable alternative that was presented in the stakeholder meetings that we believe will lead us to the path of compliance, but the engagement process has not ended and we remain open if there are alternatives that folks would like to present. So the next steps, where are we today? Well, we've engaged with the public through these stakeholder meetings, and the next step is going to be to finalize the draft. And this draft is initially just us as airport staff working with the consultant to make the changes that we believe take us to a path of compliance. And then once we have that initial draft, we will publish that on the Fly SBA website, specifically at the section here noted in bullet point number 2, so that you can comment specifically to the changes that are being proposed from the existing document. As I will go ahead and echo our consultant. Please, if there are very specific items that we believe need to be addressed, please be very specific in those responses. If it's just a general dissatisfaction, we need to know what your recommendation is to overcome that dissatisfaction. So I would encourage you to be as thorough as possible in your responses. Additionally, you could also submit any and all general comments in writing to SBA Public Comment at santabarbaraca.gov, which is a general mailbox that we're using to basically collect all of the generalized feedback, not specific to the document updates itself. And with that being said, that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Aaron. What I would like to do is something that former Chair Curry, who unfortunately is not able to be here tonight, clarified here, and that is we've received a presentation. I would like to have an opportunity for the commissioners to ask questions, no comments, basically, mostly questions. At that point, we will then open it up to public comment. and then it'll come back to the commission for comments, and under the appropriate circumstances, votes, although there won't be a vote on this. So I will start by asking if any of the commission, we'll start down at this end. Do you have any questions?
Yes. So there's the question of the date or prospective date where the public emails on this issue will be shared with everybody, where we can go in and read them. I know that had been at one point a fixed date, and then that had changed in Bob's presentation. Do we know yet when that will be?
So what I believe you're referring to is the collective comments that he had alluded to in the actual document
Yes.
itself. He did not address the mailbox questions, although those could be made available. But I would say at this point, as we're just now wrapping up those sessions, we probably have a week or two of time to draft this document, and then we have to provide ample notice to the public to provide comment as well. So whether that be a week or two beyond the time that document is actually published, which is why the original date that you referred to was moved from the first presentation based upon the feedback that we heard from the public.
Okay. And I was very impressed with Bob's knowledge on this. I think that you guys chose very well. Question is he going to be involved in any of the actual document writing, or is he just here to mediate the meetings?
No, he's actively involved in the document writing. We rely very heavily on his expertise and his suggestions in that regard.
Very good. I think that's all I've got for now.
I have no questions at this point.
I appreciate very much the interest in determining what are the specialty services that might be excluded from what a flight school offers. And in that vein, I'd like to suggest that there be a request to each of the flight schools for them to list the very specific services that they offer and or have access to instructors for, so that I think that's where you get the most pushback in the community, is limiting the local instructors who do have specialized expertise that is not available at the flight schools. So it strikes me as a good idea would be to start with asking the flight schools, what is their specialty expertise? So that then one can figure out, okay, if there are other things that fall outside of that, then we have had a definite enunciation of what is their area of expertise, and we can go from there with people who are looking for services that are not in that particular realm.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I certainly agree with that being proactive and making the process easier for those who may or may not know if the flight school provides that service, that would be a disservice just to send them over there. So if we can work together to find a solution with that regard, and also I wouldn't stop at the flight schools. I would also conduct the outreach to our on airfield mechanics and really try to hone in on what is provided on the airfield and what's not provided on the airfield. So it makes the process a bit easier.
Thank you.
Not right now, no.
Not right now.
I have no comments at this time. So we will now go to public comments. We have only one request to speak, and that is Vince. I see you there, yes. Please do remember, even though there's only one, we have a lot to come on, so I'm going to hold you to your 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short.
Vince, can you provide us your last name as well?
Mrstik, M-R-S-T-I-K. Hope that doesn't chew into my 3 minutes.
Nope.
There's quite a few comments here that this is the MSR problem is a difficult problem to solve. And there was quite a bit of comments that you're looking for viable alternatives and you haven't found any. What I'd like everybody to know here is that the Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association, AOPA, is now aware of what is going on here, and they have considerable experience at lots of airports as to how to bring flight schools and flying clubs and independent instructors together to come up with meaningful ways to handle things. And I can say that they have volunteered at no charge to come and contribute. And as I understand, they have made multiple offers to Mr. Thompson, and I would hope that Mr. Thompson would accept their offer, because this would be very good for him and it would be very good for the community, and they will be happy to talk to the airport commissioners as well. These people have a lot of experience, and I think we ought to take advantage of that. Second thing is that there was a statement that the FAA has looked at your plan and approved it. I think everybody here needs to know the FAA does not approve MSRs. You can submit to the FAA, or you can use any MSR that you like, and it stands until somebody challenges it. It's not until it's challenged that it comes under test. So the fact that a single FAA person says, gee, I like this, it means nothing in terms of the long term. And this is why the AOPA, I think, would be of immense value to you. The last comment I want to make is about notification. You were asked by some of these commissioners here to notify everybody, and one of the things that was asked for you folks was simply look at the people who have badges. You have records of everybody who has a badge. And for God's sake, I cannot understand why you have not notified those aircraft owners and pilots according to the badges that you have on record. I, for example, have not received a notification of this meeting officially from you folks. So please, try and bring in everybody and accept their comments. One last comment, I still got some time. You have also been asked to make your charts available so that these commissioners and the users can review your charts and come with comments. That virtually has never happened, despite the fact that you've been asked to do it. Please, make your charts available so people have a time to review and respond accordingly. We shouldn't have to get up and shoot blind. And Mr. Hopkins here has done a good thing. He's done the rare thing of letting you people speak and then us speak after you've made a presentation. But what's really needed is we need to look at your charts ahead of time and put our thoughts together. This is the only way you're going to come up with something that people are happy with. Because if anybody's unhappy, I can assure you the FAA, there will be a complaint filed with the FAA, and this operation will come to a halt. So please, take advantage of the things that are available and do the job right. Don't just try and push through something that is clearly not going to work. Thank you.
Time. Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have comments now? We'll start at this end this time.
I do not.
Okay, so now I'm free from the question-only limitation. I can't emphasize how much it is important both to make a few changes because it is uncontrolled and we don't have the hold harmless clauses, which are very important, but just to bring up the concept that this airport is surrounded by a community. And people in this community, they put up with the noise and all the other issues that go along with it, but they want to see some benefit for themselves, whether it's flying off on vacation or a business trip, which is all well and good. But we have a lot of community involvement in the aviation people, aviators that come here to fly their airplanes, or people who come here to learn to fly. And this community involvement solves a lot of the political friction we have for having an airport right in the middle of Goleta. So I'm just sort of speaking out that whatever solution we need to do shouldn't shut out the involvement by the community, the chance to send their sons and daughters down here to learn to fly, or themselves to come down and fly, or experienced aviators to get the specialized training that they need that is not offered at a regular flight school. So we do have to meet the lockdown requirements of the FAA, but we don't want to lock our community out of this airport. That was it.
Thank you. I have no comment at this time. So that concludes item 9. Now, in looking through the speaker slips, I realized that there apparently was a public comment that I missed. So if Barbara Greenleaf is here, please go ahead. I'm sorry I missed you the first go around.
Yeah, I mean, the airport has definitely been bragging about its tremendous growth. So we in the neighborhoods adjacent who are suffering with the noise would like to know what we have to look forward to. And I've asked you before, what's the end game? What's your saturation? And you said, oh, we really don't know. Got an answer?
You have the floor, ma'am.
Okay. And then I've asked, what about private planes? Well, we really can't regulate how they come and go. But apparently what you can regulate is all the new airlines who are being invited in. Now you're at 1 million passenger miles. Can we not put the brakes on this headlong race until we have some clarification about what it's going to do to noise? We live adjacent, and the planes are coming in where they're not supposed to be coming in. And I know that your method is to give letters to the pilots. Well, it doesn't seem to be very effective. So is there going to be any change, or is this it? So those are my comments. And I think the fact that your PR says, well, we're really working with the neighbors, so far I haven't seen that. And I think that allowing 15 minutes for speakers at the end, no more than 3 minutes each, doesn't really seem all that neighbor friendly.
Thank you. The next item is item number 10, the fixed base operator FBO redevelopment project update and recommended city council approval of proposed interim FBO leases. And we have a longer list here that the commission received a presentation, that the commission recommend approval to the city council and authorize the director to execute 3-year lease agreements with 2 one-year options for signature, and the same thing for Atlantic Aviation, the 2 FBOs. So those are the 3 sub-items on this. I'm sorry, I had I think everybody could hear me. I didn't have my mic on. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Commissioners. Agenda item 10 is the result of several months of lease negotiations that have resulted in agreement on an interim lease for our FBOs that buys us the necessary time to complete the FBO redevelopment project. This is a significant effort and progress towards this major redevelopment project. It also allows the airport to regain control of much needed ramp space to accommodate growing activity on the airport. On February the 11th, staff held a lease subcommittee meeting and presented these agreements and the resulting changes to the 3 committee commissioners. They all complimented staff on the work undertaken and the bold solutions presented. Staff did not present this as a perfect solution because it will require the relocation of at least 3 additional tenants. However, this solution meets our business needs today, and any tenant impacted, despite their lease having already expired or will expire soon, will be accommodated in other available space on the airport. Tonight's presentation will walk you through the complex details of these proposed lease changes that both of our FBOs are in agreement with. And with that, Deanna will present.
All righty. Good evening, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to give you this presentation this evening. I would typically stand at the microphone over there, but I don't want to stand with my back to the audience, so I will remain seated here and give you an update on the fixed-based operator redevelopment. Quite a number of pieces to this, as Henry said. I'd like to start by taking a quick look back, and not all that far back, actually, just to December. We have tried to maintain an even pace with our updates to the Commission and the public about the progress in this effort, even though it has been going on for quite some time. And the last time we discussed this was in December. And we talked about really what the focus of our work had been to date and what our continuing focus of work would be. And it's easily summarized by our continuing efforts to right-size the FBO leaseholds that were initially developed in concept as part of the master plan, which I believe you remember was approved in late 2017. So we've continued to work on that. That's really sort of a nuts and bolts exercise of looking at the space and the feasibility for the space. We've also been making progress in our plans for outreach. There's been quite a bit of outreach going on here, and we continue to plan for outreach specific to this effort in March and April of this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We talked about balancing demands for space on the airport and recognizing that the airport actually controlled very little of our space on the airfield, useful airfield space, most of it being controlled by the fixed-based operators by tradition here. And then, of course, planning for the interim leases with the existing FBOs to take us this last distance to the competitive RFP process, selection of operators, and preparations for redevelopment. And of course, the current lease is expiring in May of this year. We have been planning for those since late last year. So just to touch again on what balancing demands really meant. When we started with the process of looking at the interim leases, we really assumed that we would be looking at pretty much a status quo scenario as the last time that we looked at these leases, but it really didn't turn out to be the case. Of course, commercial service growth, and I want to emphasize demand for commercial air service. We respond to demand at this airport, and so when they come, we respond, and that's what we have done here. We've responded to new air carriers coming with new destinations, more frequencies, of course, the upgauging of aircraft as fleets have changed and modernized, so more seats on aircraft, and of course, as a West Coast airport, we have more demand for morning departures headed east. That means that more aircraft are coming here at the end of the day and are remaining on our airfield overnight for their morning departures, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And that requires more space on the ground. So given those considerations and understanding that we are overall a space-constrained facility, but on top of that, most of that space is devoted or has been devoted traditionally to the FBOs, we really had to engage in a study of what the overall most efficient uses were of the existing space. And we've been juggling these challenges for quite some time. This past summer, we really struggled with the commercial air traffic trying to find enough space on the airfield to park planes, particularly overnight. So we looked at the FBO ramp space and the building properties really from the ground up. We didn't start from looking at the leaseholds of the FBOs today and looking to revise down. We really started from zero and tried to build back up to the most efficient overall use of the space. And so looking at that, we really adopted a more proactive approach to managing the airfield and recognizing that these agreements expire and recognizing that we really needed the opportunity to maintain control of the ramp area for commercial aviation use. Now is the chance we're going to have it, and this is the chance that we had to take it. We also took a look at, since, as I said, most of our real estate, a lot of it on the airfield had been leased to FBOs for a wide variety of uses, not just aircraft parking. We really took a look at what types of facilities might be more in the airport's interest from a flexibility standpoint, from a management perspective for the airport to manage, as opposed to delegating that responsibility to the FBOs. So out of all that was born a project. So we had a lot of these considerations going on concurrently, and out of that came a plan. looking at where can we recapture space on the ramp for commercial aircraft parking. And in the process of looking at where we could do that, we identified a number of things, I would say hurdles, but certainly challenges that we would need to overcome in order to create that. So first of all, as I've just been talking about, reclaiming leasehold space from the FBOs in a measured fashion, a very thoughtful and methodical fashion. We have a World War II era hangar that has been sort of on the chopping block for many, many years, recognizing its location and wanting to demolish it to create more space, reconfigure our rental car parking to create more airfield space, reconfigure the SITA ramp. And when I looked at this slide earlier today, I realized that I had an acronym that not everybody maybe knows, but SITA, a secure identification display area. So that's the most secure area of the airport and where commercial aircraft park. And then build space for 3 mainline aircraft to remain overnight. And then some other changes that we could make, including adding a walkway, and then possibly looking toward the future where those parking spaces could be converted to actual ground boarding locations, similar to what we have on the north end with Gate 5. So all of that you can see here depicted in this rendering, which is a draft rendering. It's early, but we think we've found what appears to be a pretty reasonable solution together with our consultants. So you can see here we've created at the south end of the terminal, and I'll use the pointer. Here's the south end of the terminal. Here's Gate 1, 2, and 3. Here we've created 3 commercial aircraft parking spaces. Here's our hangar that is gone. Reconfigured the rental car parking, which currently today basically sort of sticks out into the airfield. And in the process, create more space for rental car parking, which we have a shortage of. It's ready return parking. This is really not parking per se. It's more like car exchange going on, picking up cars and dropping off cars. So you can see we're taking a considerable bit of ramp here. And who does that ramp belong to? Well, that ramp currently belongs to Atlantic Aviation. And Atlantic Aviation's service center is right here located. Over the last year, and certainly actually over the last number of years since the terminal was built, the airport has continued to nibble away, sometimes taking more or less large bites out of Atlantic's leasehold, leaving them with less and less to really work with. And this proposal right here is sort of the death nail of that, with leaving Atlantic with essentially no space, no ramp space to operate with. This is this solves our issues, at least in the short to medium term with overnight parking. But of course, that necessitates looking at an even bolder solution when it comes to the FBO leaseholds, which will move to the next slide. And our interim leases. So we did talk about interim leases back in December of 2019. We talked about it in the context of the challenges for the commercial parking. So all of these things obviously were in rotation at the time. And we recognized, though, at the same time that the FBO services needed to remain in place, particularly because we're in this interim phase between now and when the RFP is issued, when the competitive process happens, and when we begin new development. So all of these services, it's about continuity of service, needing to make sure that we have the services for and not only commercial aviation, general aviation, the corporate aviation, transient parking, tie downs, hangar storage, fueling, of course, is very critical. And then the FBOs, of course, play a really important part in our overall security vigilance at the airport for those who come and go. So looking at the next generation of interim lease agreements, we decided that it was best to not do what we did the last time, which was to amend what were already at the time very mature leases, shall we say. And in several cases, they had been restated and amended. And we decided that really the best thing to do was to go for that best in industry model lease agreement, even though it would be short term, because it would still benefit us by developing basically the platform for the long-term leases that would come after. And those leases, of course, will have to live for a good 30 years, most likely. So we worked again with LeighFisher to develop the framework for that. And we also worked on developing a new more transparent rate structure. And I'll touch on that for just a second because obviously the finances behind this are important. In the old agreements, the FBOs essentially paid ground rent. They didn't pay rent for the buildings on top of the ground. They paid for the ground that anything, including aircraft, was on. The problem with those agreements is that for those of us who came on at a sort of a later generation here that are relatively new at the airport, it was somewhat hard for us to decipher how that structure was arrived at. The Cliff Notes version wasn't really available for us. So when we last went to take away space from Atlantic, 50,000 square feet, we were struggling to figure out exactly how much of a credit they would get. So what we did, in short, was to work with LeighFisher, who looked at other comparable airports in Southern California, although direct comparables, of course, are difficult to find, and looked at and also looked at the building composition that we had on the property, recognizing that we have everything from 1940s to 1960s, 70s buildings, varying condition, size, use, and really work to develop a transparent rate structure that is a blended rate of both land and buildings, and something that is comparable to other airports. And primarily, if one of us should be run over by a bus tomorrow, the folks that come after us can figure out how that rate structure came about. And so we're actually pretty pleased that we have come up with a structure that makes sense in these agreements, and we'll have to revisit that obviously when we get to more of the long-term agreements. And these agreements, of course, because they are interim, we will need to build in some flexibility for changing conditions of which we don't know. Obviously, change happens all the time, and we need to plan for that flexibility even in our agreements. I can touch more on rate structure when we get a little bit further into the specific proposals here. So next steps, again, touched on this in December. The interim leases, this was our milestones that we had at that point to complete the space review from the ground up, look at what relocations that would need to take place if we made any changes to the status quo. We needed to obviously negotiate with the FBOs, who are our partners, develop those agreement terms with them, and then engage in a transparent approval process so that we know that we're set moving into the RFP and we're in a good spot as we head into the competitive environment. And then, of course, the community outreach piece. That has been going on in tandem with that. And as you can see here, we're planning for 4 outreach meetings in March and April. We have generally the folks, the groups that are identified. We will capitalize on some of the work that Aaron's team has done, but we also are able to capitalize on some of the work that was done in conjunction with the master plan, the folks or their positions that need to be involved with that. So we're looking at it as obviously an opportunity for input on the process, a common understanding of what a successful outcome is for the FBO redevelopment, and even for those that are not aviation experts, offer a chance to learn a little bit more about general aviation at our airport. So, status report for where we are today in February of 2020. We had specific outcomes that we were looking for. Obviously, we needed more commercial aircraft parking space. We wanted to more equitably share the FBO space that we ultimately arrived on, because we've had a pretty disparate distribution of that space over the years. Atlantic has had roughly around 400,000 square feet, where Signatures had roughly twice that. So we wanted to come up with a more equitable distribution of that space that would make sense, obviously, from an operational standpoint. We needed to achieve equitable lease terms that would stand up to scrutiny from those from the outside. Revenue neutrality. Although it would be difficult, we needed to try to maintain revenue neutrality for the airport's revenues, because we're actually taking space back from the FBOs, so they're no longer paying for that space. We may derive revenue from it from commercial aircraft parking, but still we wanted to try to maintain as much neutrality as possible. in our revenues. And then we've been talking about this for a few years now, but the fuel farms, we have two of them. One belongs to Signature, one to Atlantic. They have not been on coterminus agreements as their main agreements. And with this effort, we will have everything expiring at the same time. And that's obviously very critical from a coordination standpoint. So where we're at, we've completed the review of the space, determined the scope of the relocations. Not perfect, as Henry said, but we've tried to deal with them as best we can. We've negotiated with the FBOs and developed those terms, and now, of course, we're in the midst of this approval process. So the first interim FBO lease that I would like to outline for you, and then at the end of this presentation, of course, questions, but also ask for your recommendation to move this forward to the City Council for approval. And I should add that this item, because these are, as you can see at the bottom, proposed as 3-year terms with 2 one-year options, approval could stop at this point, technically, but we recognize that these leases are of what is considered to be special significance for the city. So our intention, for the sake of transparency, is to take them to the City Council as well for approval. So this proposal would achieve what, in some sense, is contemplated for the long-term redevelopment of the FBO leaseholds, and that is relocating Atlantic to the north of the airfield. They would go to the northwest corner of the airfield, and their current leasehold, which is in the southeast corner, would in its entirety revert back to airport control. Now, in order for Atlantic to operate from the north end, they have to have a service center. They have one on the south end, and they need to have one on the north end. It would need to have space for their customers. It would need to have parking. It would need to have access for their customers to get out to the airfield. So for that, we would reconfigure a space at 1503 Cook Place, which is currently occupied by 3 tenants. It would be reconfigured into one space. They would retain their current facilities in the Northeast Hangar facility. Again, the fuel farm agreement would be coterminus. We developed a market rent, a blended rate market rent, and again, a 3-year term with 2 one-year options at the airport's sole discretion. Signature is going to be remarkably similar in some ways, in other ways not. They will remain on their existing footprint, but that footprint would be fairly dramatically reduced because obviously now we need to have 2 FBOs on the north end. They would retain the self-fueling operation that they purchased just a few years ago. So they would continue to operate that in the far northwest corner. Like Atlantic, retain their space in the hangar facility, a coterminus fuel farm agreement, the same market rent, or roughly the same market rent. We've touched upon this earlier in the lease review subcommittee. Atlantic is going to be making some investments into the Cook Place building for which they will not be receiving any kind of a tenant reimbursement or tenant support. So for that reason, their rent is just a few cents lower per square foot than Signature, but the same 3-year term with 2 one-year options. So this is meant to be mostly, I would say, more illustrative than perfect, because land is not easy to categorize. But the story we really wanted to tell here is that Atlantic Aviation increases their footprint somewhat. Signature reduces their footprint fairly considerably, and a considerable amount of space is reverted back to the airport for both, I should emphasize, commercial aviation use, but also general aviation use at the southeast corner of the facility. So here, which I'm hoping is a somewhat improved map from the last time, it is Google Maps this time. You can see this is the north side of the airfield, where Signature's leasehold is indicated in sort of this purplish color. The hangar facility over here, as I said before, remains largely the same. There is some preferential parking, not exclusive parking, on the north end here for Signature. One of the hangars here, we would like to attempt to negotiate a direct lease with a mechanic that is currently under sublease with Signature. but otherwise stay pretty much the same. As a landmark here, this building right here is the one we're sitting in right now. So you can see that if we sort of illustrate, Signature more or less had all of this before. And now we have Atlantic with a carve out of this space on this side, and also necessarily some on this side of the parallel one-ways in order to equalize that leasehold somewhat. All right, and there are some other resulting changes, many of which are not entirely, they're a necessary outcome, but some of them good, some of them painful. We readily admit. So 3 tenants in the 1503 Cook Place must relocate from that space. We do have new locations proposed for those space for the tenants' consideration. We would relocate the city tie-down area to the south end because that leasehold would be going to Atlantic. Surf Air, which is currently in building, we call it 122. It is an Atlantic building, would need to relocate to co-locate, at least on the short-term basis, with Atlantic. And then, of course, there would be a transition phase where Atlantic is actually preparing the 1503 Cook Place building for occupancy. There have been some questions about the South GA area and whether the Atlantic T hangars are able to remain there. And yes, they will remain there. We also have will have a considerable amount of small aircraft parking available. And we do actually have an illustration that we got from our consultant today that visualizes, if anybody would like to take a look at this a little bit later, just how much aircraft parking we think we can get in there, and maybe even a little bit more. So that is the bulk of the presentation. I will ask for advice on this item. It's a little unusual to give an update that is also a request for approval. But that is what we have before you today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will once again start, let's see, I started there last time. We'll start down here with questions.
Thank you. Yes, I had some questions that I want to lead off with. First off, I think this is a very, very good proposal overall and good for the airport. There obviously will be some pain and suffering, and we want to minimize that. Let's talk bathrooms. You're going to have the south access. You're going to have a lot of tie-downs.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are there now are used to going into Atlantic's beautiful facility, getting a cup of coffee, using the bathroom, and walking out to their tie-down. Are airport going to provide any bathroom access over there?
Well, I can touch on that, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. For the city tie-down tenants that go down that direction, we don't have any restrooms where they're parked today, so we could certainly porta potty. That, if that could be classified, yeah. But we will have there, though, what we don't have today is parking. So I'm fairly certain that we can figure out a way to address the restroom issue in that area as we have in other areas where we don't have it.
Good.
Thank you for the question.
Wanted to bring that to your attention, and since I'm on a bathroom kick here, the T hangars that are currently Signature that are going over to Atlantic, over on the, if you want to put up your slide, you can.
Sure. I'll go back to our...
So you have your T hangars that are very close to the new
Probably
Signature
right
right here.
here.
Now, same kind of problem, bathrooms. Currently, those tenants are Signature tenants and can walk on over to Signature's facility. Obviously, if you have tenants that aren't paying anything to Signature, Signature might say, could you find something else? Or we might want to coordinate with Atlantic because that's going to be really their issue. So
I'm pretty sure that Atlantic is going to want to make sure that their customers are that they're cared for in that way.
Okay, so that's enough of my potty comments. But I did have another one. Same area, you have a delineation between Atlantic and Signature. So we have the two FBOs right up against each other. Are we going to delineate on the ramp area a painted line or anything? Because the T hangars that are Atlantic's, those people have to push out towards Signature. And of course, Signature wants to tie down planes. we might avoid some friction by at least having an airport painted line that says, that signature, this is Atlantic's.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowen. In this area, we actually are used to dealing with, we have a number of tenants that are in close quarters over there, including, in this, I'm looking for the city T hangars where those folks are at.
To the left
they're-
of the red.
The left of the,
Red roof.
yes. So, a specific solution to that, we haven't contemplated in that degree of detail at this point, but that's something that we are going to want to work with Atlantic and Signature on to address. We are confident that they will be able to cohabitate successfully.
Oh, yes.
They have been able to cohabitate very successfully over at the 495 South Fairview hangars, and in general on the airfield have been able to do that. So I'm sure that we will have an opportunity to deal with those issues as they come up.
I agree. I'm pitting on the little tiny issues, just trying to bring them up and smooth this out. It's overall a very, very, very good, bold plan that I think is going to be for the benefit of the airport. And then finally, just a question when you're looking at things, and a reminder to everybody that, yes, there is some pain for some of these relocations, but you always have to focus on our aviation-related tenants as number one. And we have some non-aviation tenants that are getting relocated, and that's unfortunate, but we have to do it. So with that, that's all of my questions.
I have a question, a financial question. There's going to be a substantial restructuring of rates here, and you speak to neutrality. Do we have a projection on the effect on revenue and operating expense, and a separate projection on the capital equipment, the capital expenditure that the airport will see?
Commissioner Wilson, we looked primarily at achieving status quo on the revenue side from the FBOs, recognizing what they are paying us today. Restructuring, it's not quite apples to oranges because we restructured the rates, but there obviously was an increase in the rates. There needed to be in order for us to get close to revenue neutrality. As far as capital expenditures go, we aren't planning to make any capital expenditures in this scenario. Obviously, there's a relocation taking place, and Atlantic is bearing the brunt of that, which they do get some compensation for in their rate. Otherwise, Atlantic or Signature, is largely status quo, and it's a short-term lease, so we don't anticipate we would be making any capital investments. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So at the bottom line, we would not expect any change.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Would you explain what happens to the current aviation tenants at 1503 Cook Place, where they go? Also, how the structuring and access to the South Airfield general aviation parking, and is there any thought toward, at some point in the future, moving the self-service fueling over there, because that's kind of where it needs to be?
Yes, Commissioner Khan, I'd be happy to address that. So the Cook Place building is right here in yellow, and probably the slide that is going, well, we have actually 4 tenants in that building, one of which would not be required to relocate because there's a load-bearing wall between that particular tenant and the other 3. So it's not practical to actually try to combine that space. So that tenant will remain. That is an R&D tenant, not directly aviation related. The other 3 tenants, there is one that is aviation related, and obviously that's the flight school. We have a retail, quasi-retail electronics store in the space, and we also have Maripro, which is a defense contractor, does a variety of things. They occupy quite a bit of space in this general area. We will have an ability to relocate them to another space. So I think probably for the south end, the best rendering for that, or the close, well, I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to show that on the end, because it just shows our parking spaces. So on the south end, okay, we do see at least a little part of this. So on the south end, the flight school would be contemplated to go into this space here in building 122. There actually is a smaller flight school already that is a tenant in that space, and then there is some airport controlled space. This has been an odd building to begin with because it's half airport and half Atlantic. So we would be assuming the entire building. This space right here is currently occupied by Surf Air. They did a tremendous amount of tenant improvement in that space. It looks like a business lounge. It's very nice. They did that as a tenant to Atlantic. So obviously understanding that their lease would end. So that was a decision they made that we ultimately and the next tenant will benefit from. So the flight school, there's one right here already right now that, of course, currently has access to the airfield. And the flight school, the second flight school that could go into this space, would eventually have its access by way of a pedestrian walkway and a pedestrian gate. Now, the thing to remember here is that this process and this is a project that right now is a glimmer in our eye and will take some time to actually realize. So initially, the tenants in this building will have direct airfield access. Eventually, it will be replaced by a walkway and a pedestrian access gate. The benefit here, of course, is that there is parking here for that business, and there is a considerable amount of parking on the other side of the Atlantic building. The Atlantic building, we've had questions as to what we would do with that building. There's a number of possibilities, one of which could be to lease it out, of course, to a tenant that needs 5,000 square foot of space. It's quite a bit of space. There's also a possibility that that could be useful for the airport for some operational purpose. It's really not a space that can be divided for multiple tenants since it has one set of bathrooms and one, to your point about restrooms, one hallway to get there. It was built to function as an FBO, and it does, of course, have airfield access. So any tenant that would go in there, and of course, if the airport went in there at some point, would benefit from that airfield access. Self-serve fueling is a good point because it is up at the north end. If it would be relocated there, because we kind of went back and forth about the self-serve fueling. It does belong to Signature. They invested in it. It's their infrastructure. It would be a matter of it would need to be relocated, and of course that would cost money. So that would be that's something we've thought of but not studied. So that would require additional study.
Was Atlantic asked if they wanted the whole of 1503 Cook Place, even recognizing there's a load-bearing wall that could obviously serve as offices, or did they decline to have that much space there since they still are on a fairly uneven footing with Signature?
Yes, Commissioner Kahn. Initially, yes, they did ask for the entire space. However, in order to utilize the entire space, it would require a significant amount of investment. And since the airport is not providing any sort of tenant support for that, that would come at a considerable cost. So I think it was a cost benefit. And of course, we are not eager to move tenants if we don't need to. So given the various factors, cost, the wall, did they absolutely need to have that space, and trying to avoid relocating a tenant if we could avoid it, all led us to the conclusion that we could leave that tenant in place.
Thank you.
I believe in the very beginning of your statement, or possibly it was Director Thompson's, said that all of the tenants being moved, all three of them, I believe have been accommodated. What is the exact, because it may have changed since the lease review?
Yes, Commissioner Hopkins. So in some cases, we have more than one option for a tenant to consider. In some cases, we really have one option for a tenant to consider. But in every instance, we have options that would work for a tenant if they so choose to take advantage of it. So Not to get into too much detail, but we did have a tenant on the north side that fairly recently gave notice that they wanted to vacate. We haven't leased that space out because it seemed like an appropriate space for one of those tenants. And so we're just in the process of discussing that with the tenant. The electronics store, there's a couple of different options given that type of business. The flight school, really one option that puts it near the airfield and demonstrably in an area where a flight school can function, as there is one there already. So it's been a puzzle. It's not easy. I mean, I think you know from our property reports, we're nearly always fully leased. So it's been a bit of a shell game to, in some cases, hold on to property that we thought would be appropriate, and then of course propose it.
So the negotiations are currently undergoing with those 3 tenants, but nothing has been decided yet. Is that correct?
Commissioner Hopkins, one tenant we have provided a lease proposal to.
Okay.
The second tenant, we have offered a couple of different options in a varying size, whether it's a matter of what a tenant can afford to, so different configurations. So yes, in that case, discussing back and forth. And then in the case of the third tenant, yeah, basically looking at the space that we have available and planning for that.
What is the difference in the lease rate between the proposed flight school building and the current flight school building?
So,
on a per square foot basis.
Yeah, so Commissioner Hopkins, so the lease rates for those spaces are really determined by what is approved annually by the commission. So when a lease expires, if we renegotiate a lease, the starting point is, if you're starting with a brand new lease, you look at the commission lease rates that have been approved for that particular type of a use. So off the top of my head, I can't recall exactly what the flight school is per square foot today. I do know that in the lease proposal that we provided the lowest rate that the commission has approved for an office type space use.
Thank you. This question concerning the fuel, the self-serve fuel, had me confused. It is my understanding that in the 3 to 5 year time frame, that is when we go from an interim FBO lease to a permanent FBO lease, or a very long-term one, that the GA that has been moved to the southeast will be moved back to the northwest, because the southeast long-range plan, at least per the master plan, is for additional parking. Is that still a correct assumption, a viable longer-term plan?
Commissioner Hopkins, we've obviously looked at what the master plan has contemplated, and we recognize that that's pretty long-term. And it's long-term to the point where it's fairly speculative of us to say that within 3 to 5 years that relocation would need to take place. We're feeling confident that for that duration of time, and perhaps some considerable time beyond that, that space will continue to be viable for small GA aircraft activity.
Okay. While looking at Google Earth and after the lease review, I started looking at it to see all of these different options. And I noticed that, because we also discussed then that we're out of parking, or have been completely out of parking at times. I counted about 170 or 80 car parking, 170 or 80 parking lot down at the Deckers building, with what looked like a place where one could easily put a gate. Has there been any consideration of that for automobile parking, since we're running out?
Commissioner Hopkins, really that space, because of the condition of the lot there and its remote location, it's pretty difficult to find. We have mostly used it as relief parking for rental cars when we have needed to. So in other words, it hasn't been, and dealership parking. We have done some of that, but not public parking.
Okay.
There have been occasions when we have also used it for employee parking, but not general public parking.
So who currently maintains all of the buildings and hangars on the airfield, and who will maintain them under this arrangement?
Commissioner, which building or which hangar specifically?
Well, hangars 1, 2, 3, 4, the Nexus hangar, the T hangars that are currently signatures, the T hangars that are currently Atlantics.
So those would remain. Those would obviously transfer to the specific leaseholder that's
Right.
that's contemplated as part of that lease, and the responsible party would be as defined in that lease agreement.
So currently, I believe that the airport is responsible for maintaining a number of those buildings. Are you saying that is now being shifted to the FBOs?
No, that would stay status quo. So that has more to do with the responsibilities. The airport is responsible for exterior painting and exterior, the roof and things like that.
Roof and doors
yes.
and side.
Those kinds of things would not change.
That all stays with the
that
airport?
would not change.
Okay. Now, if I understand right, Surf Air is going to move into, I'll call it, what is the number? Cook's 13 what?
1503.
Right.
Surf Air would not.
They're going to co-locate with Atlantic in the Cook Street building.
Well, I think probably that's going to be something that's best left to Atlantic to figure out. I think they're, at least initially, as we understand, they would need to vacate their current space.
That was my question.
And most likely, they would cohabitate with Atlantic in their current service center.
Oh,
they
okay.
actually did cohabitate in
Okay.
that service center at one time.
Okay, that because it seemed like we had one building with two tenants in it at the same time. I knew that wasn't the case, but I was curious as to how. When you speak about revenue neutrality, is that revenue neutrality from the FBOs? And the reason I ask is we're picking up probably on the order of $10,000 a month from the T hangars that are currently Atlantics, plus the tie downs, unless they happen to move north, but they may or may not. So the question is that revenue neutral over all of that, or is it just revenue neutral between the FBOs, and in fact the airport will pick up a little revenue down there?
Commissioner Hopkins, that is revenue neutrality in terms of what the FBO, the revenue stream from the FBOs specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I have in questions?
No, it's a lot to digest in a short period of time, and have to make a decision so quickly. But I don't have a question.
Hey, Deanna, great work. Oh my gosh, I was thinking you spent weeks on this, but it's really months and maybe a year or two. I'm going back to Commissioner Hopkins' questions on that southeast corner of the airfield with the T hangars currently leased by Atlantic. It seems to me that our goal was to move general aviation out of there so we wouldn't have private pilots taxiing behind airliners. Is that still our ultimate goal?
Commissioner Houghton, I'm not sure that I'm the best authority on the master plan and how that is contemplated, but I do know that general aviation typically tends to use the parallel runways there. Mm-hmm. So that seemingly is a convenient location for them for this period of time. And also the T hangars, just as a note, when the Atlantic lease agreement expires, those T hangars, per that agreement, reverted to the ownership of the airport. So, and they're actually mobile. They move, but in this case, Atlantic would not have room for them in their new leaseholds, so they would stay.
Okay.
And just to add to that, the master plan does show that entire Southfield area being designated for commercial activity. But you're talking mid to long term, and at this point it's really difficult to even explain to you what that means in years. Okay. But ultimately, GA will be moved from that area at some point in the future.
We're probably looking at 5 to 7 years or beyond.
Or more.
We may be
Yeah.
gone.
And Dennis, to answer your question, there is a taxiway that was built, Mike, which actually comes to the south on the north side of the field and bypasses the terminal and lets them go straight to it as opposed to always having to cross by it.
Thank you, Commissioner Khan. My second question is, as Henry well knows, I'm somewhat of a historical preservationist, and I'm curious about this World War II hangar that's going to be demolished. Is there any historical significance with this hangar?
That is an excellent question, Commissioner Houghton. Actually, that hangar is one of 5 hangars of the World War II generation, and those were, as I think some of the commissioners would know from the master plan time frame, that those hangars were all examined for historical significance, and hangars 1, 2, and 3, I believe, were all determined to have historical significance and cannot be torn down. Hangar 4, which is Signature's Service Center, and Hangar 5 have over the years had so much work, shall we say, done to them that they're no longer, their integrity, their historical integrity is no longer intact, and so therefore they were deemed as expendable.
Okay. And that building that's going to be demolished, what hangar number is that?
5.
It is 5.
It's 5.
Okay, and because I'm still searching for a potential air museum here at SBA, and I didn't want to leave any stone unturned.
Well, that's certainly not it.
Okay. I still am chagrined. I mean, I don't fly out of Burbank anymore, but every
Yeah.
time I go down the southwest area and I look at that empty airfield, I see the Lockheed B6 building is not there, and that was such a shame to lose that building when it could have been really the premier West Coast air museum. So I'm going to ask these questions so we
That's
don't
okay.
act too quick
It's all
on some
right.
of these buildings.
Dennis, the Historic Lands Commission, I believe is the title, did review that, and because the original intent of the master plan was to demolish all 5 of them.
Okay.
And they commissioned the appropriate study, came up with a answer that we had here, 1, 2, and 3 cannot, 4 and 5 can.
Okay.
And that went to the historic, I think it's called the Historic Lands Commission, one of the other City of Santa Barbara commissions, and they concurred with that and thus gave permission for those 2.
Thank you, Commissioner Hopkins.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, so we have 2 requests to speak. Gordon Feingold.
Hello, Commissioners and Airport. Gordon Feingold, 45-year user of Santa Barbara Airport, going back into the 70s as a flight instructor, then a commuter pilot, corporate pilot, and later on in my own use of aircraft for business. And I've also been I was on the Airport Master Plan Committee. I've been on the Noise Abatement Committee. I've kind of been doing a lot of stuff around here for a long time. So I am a current tenant of Atlantic, and I first want to express my appreciation as well as sympathy to Atlantic and the FBOs. They do such a great job with what are really inadequate, antiquated facilities. I mean, as you mentioned, these buildings, some of these buildings are 70 years old, and they're held up by termites holding hands. It's a little rough. So as a member of the Airport Master Plan Committee, I was really excited about the possibility of finally getting some good facilities here built for general aviation. And so this is a little curve in the road, or maybe a very sharp turn in the road here. And I certainly can see the need for this and sympathize with the needs of the airport and parking those aircraft overnight. So I guess the biggest concern that I have is, what does this do for the future of increasing the facilities here that are going to be available for general aviation aircraft? The concern that I have in the document that was put out by the airport is the following sentence that says that it's become clear that the demand for general aviation services is likely to be much lower than projected. So, I mean, as a member of that master plan committee, we went through a year after year process, public public process, and there definitely is demand there. I mean, the FBOs have had waiting lists for hangars forever. I mean, for decades. So I'm a little concerned that we're going, well, we're going to throw it up in the air. We're just going to kind of allocate the space. What is going to happen with the building of hangars, for example, in the area south of Charlie, south of Signature there? Is that still, in the plan? Where is that going to happen? And I'm saying if we're going to accelerate this process of moving, Atlantic to the north side, why can't we also accelerate the process of getting some of those facilities built, improving the facilities, and making room for the aircraft that do want to be here? And I, like I say, the demand is definitely there. The other thing I'd like to say is in terms of the allocation of resources, or this move between Signature and Atlantic, I'd like to point out that Atlantic is losing all of their tenants. Signature is losing, I think, basically none of their tenants. So there seems to be a little inequity there in terms of how this is kind of being deployed. So again, I do want to express my appreciation for the FBOs, but the biggest point I want to make is, please let's not kick this can down the road year after year, decade after decade of finally getting some facilities built for the aircraft that I know do want to relocate here, and have facilities that aren't, Blythe facilities that reflect our values and our standards in Santa Barbara. Let's get it done in terms of getting some GA facilities here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Next is Ken Alker.
Thank you. Commissioners and staff, my name is Ken Alker, and I own Santa Barbara Electronic Supply. I'm one of the 3 that are being displaced. I got official notice yesterday that we have until March 31st to surrender the approximately 2,000, I think it's 1,930 square feet that we're in. The point I want to make this evening, and the question I want to ask, is that I'm trying to move 1,900 square feet of retail space, and if any of you have been in there, we have 6 or 7 foot high pegboards and row after row after row of inventory. We have thousands of SKUs of little tiny parts hanging on pegs, and to move that operation to new space is massive. I have to hire an entire crew to get, lots of people to get everything packed into boxes and to move. I have to order boxes. I have to find new space. And I do understand that there's a spot that may be available for us. But if it is not appropriate and the ceilings aren't high enough and it's not laid out in such a way that I can get the inventory in there, I need to go find something elsewhere. I have to order phone lines. I have to order internet access. I have to find space. I have to find people to come in and move all. It's specialized shelving. It's retail shelving. There are certain companies that disassemble and reassemble the shelving. It's a very expensive, it's a very cumbersome process. Being given 6 weeks notice to do this is difficult, to say the least. For any company, whether it was me or somebody else, I happen to be a tax matters partner for 7 companies. My February and March are the 2 busiest months of my entire year. To have this happen now, I have no clue how I'm going to get this thing moved by March 31st. So the question, or what I beg or implore of you, is that we somehow get some more time. I have no idea. I found out about this last Tuesday. I was given the information that it's March 31st yesterday, 6 weeks. Really? Is there any chance that we can have some more time in that building to try to continue looking for other potential spaces? I looked at 6 spaces today, and when I told people I needed to be in by April 1st, I kind of got laughed at. We can't rearrange things in time. There's, we have a great spot for you in June, and et cetera. So I'm just asking you, please, as Commissioner Bowen said, help relieve my pain and suffering. This is, I can't move this company twice. It's too expensive, and I can't move it into storage while I'm looking for other space. So I'm hoping that there's some way. I have no idea what your time frame is on demolishing the building and moving everybody. I can't imagine that it's got to happen in 6 weeks, but I'm just asking, please consider giving some more time. Thank you.
Along those lines, I don't want to get in the middle of a negotiation, but I was under the impression that all of the leases in those buildings, all of these leases were expiring in the end of May. Is that not correct?
Commissioner Hopkins, that particular lease actually expired at the end of December. Yeah, it's in holdover. So there's a 30-day
held over on like a month to month?
So there's 30 days required notice according to the lease.
Okay. All right, so now is the time for commissioner comments, and this time I think I'll start. We'll go in one direction or the other. I did see this before on the lease review subcommittee meeting, which I am very glad that we had. And probably the first or second thing that we were presented with, I think Director Thompson started off with saying this isn't perfect. And I guess my comments are, I really don't like it, but I don't have a better solution. I thought I had a better solution. I presented it the next day to Director Thompson, and he pointed out why it was not an acceptable solution. And so, in the end, it is not perfect, but apparently it's the best that the airport could come up with. There are 3 commissioners who attended the lease review. None of us have come up with anything better. The other people who have been aware of it, I'm sure if they had a problem would try to come up with something better. So it is absolutely imperative, in my view, that we do not end up with a situation where an airline says, gee, we'd love to come in here, but there's no space for us, so we won't. Or worse, we'll go to Santa Maria or someplace like that. Our commercial service has to expand adequately to take care of, to continue to provide that kind of support. And this is the best thing that we have. So I am fully supportive of it, even if I don't really exactly like it, because I have often been told by a previous boss, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I have no solution better than this one, so I am supportive. We'll start this time down here with comments.
Yeah, I'd like to just employ the staff to see how we could help out Mr. Alker. Seems like there might be 2 weeks of wiggle room. I'm very much consumed by moving obstacles away from small business, medium business in this town, and it seems to me that, gosh, I can't get my builder to come in and make fixes for 12 weeks, it seems. Seems like we might find a couple more weeks for him.
And, I agree, and we will do that where possible. This is a puzzle piece, and unfortunately, one has to move before the other can, and so on and so on. Staff is continuing to have discussions, and we will work with all of the tenants that need to be relocated to the extent that we're able to.
Is there still space is it 5700 Hollister?
Oh.
No, we're fairly full over there.
Okay.
There's a commonality between the minimum standards question and this redevelopment, and that is that SBA is growing. We are evolving, and with evolution, there's required change. And change comes with pain. And I think that in both cases, we're pursuing perhaps not the perfect solution, but the best that we can do, and they're well thought out. But I think we all have to recognize that change brings some pain, and it's going to be painful, but we're doing the best that we can.
And I agree with Commissioner Wilson's comments on that wholeheartedly. And just a comment for Ken regarding Santa Barbara Electronics and whether or not he can talk directly with Atlantic and see if they can give him his space a little longer too. So it is a puzzle and it's a tough one. That's all I had.
So we have received, item A, we have received the presentation. Item B is that the commission recommend approval, I'm not going to read the whole thing, of the city, to the city council for the signature. And item C is that the commission recommend approval to the city council for the Atlantic lease as outlined above. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Passed. And last but not least is the lease agreement with WOW Gear LLC. Recommendation that the Airport Commission approve and authorize the airport director to execute a 2-year lease with one-year option to extend with WOW Gear LLC for 2,300 square feet in Building 4, Unit 4B at 6100 Hollister, effective February 1, for a monthly rental rate of $37.95, exclusive utilities and common area maintenance charges. Go.
Yes, Commissioners. Compared to the last item, this one will be fairly simple and straightforward. This is the next to last unit in the 6100 Hollister development. This tenant actually is already moving into the space under a temporary license agreement, and this would cement their tenancy for the next, I believe, it is a couple of years. So this space, I'll use the pointer again. It's the front unit right here. So this is a company that makes drinkware, as you could see from the pictures. Have been here for a while. They do, in this space, contemplated to do R&D and distribution. It's a 2-year agreement plus one-year option. Pretty standard for what we've got going on over there, with a couple of exceptions. I think you've seen that we've got at least one 10-year lease over there. But this is pretty typical for the space. The square footage is right in line with the others that we have leased over there at $1.65 a square foot. And again, that is the street frontage, so it's a little bit higher than the back facing. And has the typical CPI increase and the common area maintenance charges. So with this one, we will have one remaining space, and that is the retail space behind the coffee shop. So we will otherwise be fully leased. That'll prove to be probably one of the most difficult for us to lease, but we're getting there. So if you have any questions?
Questions? No.
Just a question on, first off, thanks for bringing us such good tenants. That's a great one. The one remaining space that's going to be difficult to lease is a rent reduction. I'm familiar with the space. It's going to be a hard one to rent. It's not as good as the other ones. Rent reduction, something the airport's considering?
Well, Commissioner Bone, we have had a few lookers, but nothing really definitive to this point that we've gotten to a negotiation point where we would be able to discuss really reducing the rates on that. I would imagine, however, though, if we continue to have difficulty with that, then we'll want to bring that to your attention and consider perhaps a deviation from our typical lease rates.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and kudos to you for getting all the other ones rented.
Thank you.
And how many square feet was that space?
This current one now, or the
Commissioner Bowen was talking about?
I believe it'd be about 2,500 square feet. Oh, 18. Oh, that's right. Because the coffee shop is a little bit larger, so each they're about 5,000 square feet, and they were split roughly equally. But in this case, the coffee shop took a little bit more of that footprint, so around 1,800.
So that space is still available?
It is still available, yes.
Is Mr. Alker still here?
He has 5,000 square feet.
Oh,
now.
oh.
Right?
I believe he has. I believe that it has 2,000 square feet, though the condition of the existing space versus that space is quite different. So the lease rates would be quite different.
Any other? Before we adjourn, I have one more question about the cameras. In the past, there was a camera over there and one over there. Oh, I'm sorry. We need a recommendation. Thank you. I need a motion to approve and authorize.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mo. We had one over there and one over there, so I assume because it's been a long time since I've watched one of these on TV, that what was displayed up here was available to the television audience or the online. Is that no longer true, or what's the status?
No, it absolutely will. This is the newest, latest technology, and the cameras are being controlled remotely from the camera crew. So they're capturing everything.
So I never saw them move. I thought
They're controlled remotely.
And
okay.
it gets
And so it
that screen.
gets whatever's shown on the screen.
Yes.
Good.
Everything's getting captured.
We are adjourned.